Good afternoon, Fiji, and welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Pedeli, and we'll be with you this whole hour talking about an issue that was, I'll start off by saying I was invited on, the day before Fiji Day to a launch of the World Mental Health Day celebrations. And with this launch, I discovered that it was, Mental Health Day is also marked on the 10th of October. It's quite difficult for us in Fiji, especially for Fiji Day being celebrated at that time, and to associate it with the color green. And that's what we are about this afternoon, talking about mental health in Fiji. And I'm joined in studio kindly by Kelera Taveta from the Psychiatric Survivors Association. Welcome to the show. And also Rosie Catherine, the Youth Champs for Mental Health, and also a carer. Now, what I want to do is we'll just chat and talk. First of all, to you, Rosie, how and when did you become involved with this issue?
Good afternoon, listeners, and Pedeli. Thank you for inviting us to the show. I've been involved with mental health issues since I was very young. My aunt was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I have families of experiences of depression and suicide. So very much younger age.
Okay. And now this, from a very young age, this being involved with the family, how did you feel about your aunt at the time?
At that time, I just thought she was very strong. She looked like she was struggling with a number of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there was some behavior that seemed quite odd, but she took care of us nevertheless. And no one really explained to us about her situation or her struggles with mental illness or what it was about. So we just went along, learned how to work with her. She cared about us, so it was most of the time we didn't really think that she was a survivor.
Well, Clara, now you're with the Psychiatric Survivors Association, and I believe you're the president of the association. Now, what about your experience? Can we start with you from the beginning?
Good afternoon, Pedeli, and to all the listeners listening out there. Thank you for accepting us for this session. For me, similar with Rosie Catherine, I've started surrounding myself with mental health problems since I was small also, because my older brother, he was being diagnosed with mental illness. It's bipolar. He's been diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And little did I know that after how many years, after 20 years, and then I was being diagnosed as that was in 2008 when I was being diagnosed as having a mental illness also, bipolar disorder.
Would you describe for us how it feels, or how did you feel at that time? I mean, what is it? What type of experience do you go through?
As for me personally, or when my brother had...
Let's start with you.
With me. At first, I was confused. I didn't even know what was happening to me because of my lack of understanding about mental illness, and then from the stigma and the behaviors towards the community, towards myself, I felt isolated, and I felt really low and depressed. Because of my experience, I was acting weird, like for example, thinking that spies were after me, and I was just verbally abusive for no apparent reason. And the community, because of their lack of understanding, they were laughing, I was ashamed. That's why I isolated myself at home. Yes.
With this, you mentioned a lot with community and family. Rosie, you being a carer, and also with a member of your family having gone through the similar experience, how much more difficult is it made by family or neighbors not being able to understand? And, I'm sure it does make it difficult, but how does it make it for a carer even more difficult a job as to care for someone with that fate?
It's very challenging because a lot of people still don't understand mental health issues and or mental illness, and so the way a person looks at you, looks at your entire family, looks at your family member, the types of words they use, and it hurts us, and it also hurts our family members, and it's really it's always a challenge to be able to explain to them, yes, my family member is sick, but that doesn't mean you mistreat by the way you behave, the way you look, the way you say things, and this is still always a challenge to be able to explain to people or to talk to them. But I'm quite straightforward, so I'm always educating people on the way, and I'm trying to be patient with them. But sometimes I find also even within families, it's very difficult sometimes for family members to be patient and to just and not try and use the words that are very negative or that adds more stigma towards our own family members. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that your brother also was also suffered from bipolar. Now, is there any? This is perhaps one of the questions that you're asked commonly, with mental health in the family. Is it something that is with those who have someone in the family that is suffering from mental health? Are other family members susceptible because someone, or is it something that can be perhaps prevalent in a family that already has it?
Most probably because I've been going for what you call this studying mental health certificate in mental health, and there's for some it's genetic. What I can just mention that for some it may be genetic. Yes.
Now there are other also influences, I'm sure, that contribute to this. Would you be able to enlighten us a little bit more on these?
I think also from my personal and my experience as well. Yes, you might have a family members of experiences of mental illness, but sometimes it may make us a bit more vulnerable to experiencing mental illness. But there are other contributing factors that may contribute that make a person more vulnerable to having a mental illness. And I know sometimes people think it's marijuana. But marijuana is also used for coping with accumulated stress and other stresses. So marijuana is not necessarily the cause of mental illness, but it may be a contributing factor to mental illness.
I'm just going to hold you right there. We're going to head into a short break, but we'll be back and speaking of mental health illness in Fiji. Welcome back to Gold FM Speak Your Mind, and I'm this afternoon we're taking on the issue of mental health in Fiji, and this month being also Mental Health Awareness Month, and we've proclaimed it here on Gold FM that we'll also take on this on Speak Your Mind, and I'm joined by our carer, Rosie Catherine, and also a mental health survivor, Kelera Taveta. Now, just before the break, we spoke a little bit about the misconceptions with drug taking and its association with mental health illness. Now, you spoke of marijuana. Now, you also said that sometimes it is used as a coping mechanism. Could you just enlighten us a little bit more about that?
I think, there's a lot of information being shared across that marijuana causes mental illness. But I've had lots of experiences working with young people. And marijuana is a substance that's used to cope with difficult situations and stressful situations in life. And so I hear a number of people, educators in the communities, that continue to say that marijuana causes mental illness. Marijuana actually contributes to can contribute to mental illness, but it's used a lot for coping with life or with difficult situations and stressful situations. And I find that we need to be clear about that, that substance use like marijuana, alcohol, they're used to cope with very difficult situations.
It is true. We see with our own families and friends who resort to drugs and also to alcohol a lot when dealing with problems, yeah, any common problems. But there's been a lot of detrimental talk about it being one of those who just leads straight to mental illness. Now, with your experience, none with drug taking or with drug abuse, but let's talk about the struggles that with having to take care of your brother at first, and how did your family cope with you also succumbing to mental health?
What Rosie Catherine mentioned, it was challenging. But that time he's the eldest. I'm the youngest. I was small, but at that time there was really lack of understanding about mental health. So for Fijian culture, it's been mentioned that for a person living with a mental illness, he's been possessed by demons, and I remembered from my experience, my parents were taking him to priests for him to be prayed over, and it was hard. It was hard because when he relapses, he's not violent towards the family. He breaks the furnitures and all, and the community, they were like in fear because they fear he might throw things at them or just violently punches them. But yeah, it was hard and challenging for the family. And after, when they knew about my acquiring this mental illness, they had probably a bit more understanding towards my situation of what they saw against my older brother. Yeah.
How much support do we have in well, as you had stated that there wasn't much awareness at the time, but how much more support is there available now for our mental health survivors and also those who are still undergoing it?
For us, for the psychiatric, the one I've joined, Psychiatric Survivors. This is the only psychiatric survivor organization in the Pacific. So that's the people who have been diagnosed with mental illness. They have joined this organization. Not really much, but we have other mental health stakeholders like UCHAMPS and the psychiatric hospital, where we are holding hands to make more awareness about mental illness towards in Fiji, within Fiji.
Rosie, how does your part, is your youth champs for mental health play? How much of a role does it play?
Since we formed in 2008, we've been working closely with the St. Giles Psychiatric Hospital, Psychiatric Survivors Association, and more recently with Fiji Alliance for Mental Health. So we only have a few organizations focused on mental health issues and also promoting mental health education. But we really need a whole lot more organizations working alongside with us. And we're hoping, recently there's been a review of the mental health strategic plan.
Oh,
There's, the Ministry of Health has other trainings going on at the moment. So we're hoping that we can be able to consistently collaborate right across the divisions. But like, we had mentioned earlier, Pedeli, we've both grown up with families of experiences of mental illness, and that's from the 1980s to now. We still don't have as much information on mental health education.
Where do you think that we can get this? What can we as a community do? I mean, what type of other support can we provide, or at least try to provide? Apart from understanding.
Well, you really need to understand somebody and accept them as they are, particularly when they're behaving quite different, or the behavior might be quite odd, and not labeling, using all those words, people use all those negative words. You need to mention that. But just giving them space to be able to express themselves, talking to them nevertheless. Sometimes people think, he or she has a mental illness. Maybe they may not understand, but actually they're listening. They're right there listening and just asking for permission. Would we be able to do this? What would you like to do? And getting educated. Ask the mental health stakeholders for some formal information, for some more education, and working with stakeholders to be able to help your friends or your families, and really listening, because I find, well, we found there is really still lack of empathy when listening.
Now, this also, I mean, you mentioned empathy, and with the way our community has progressed, our culture, how much of a challenge do you find our traditional cultures are to those with mental health issues?
Probably one of the challenges is not taking them to the psychiatric hospital because of the stigma, thinking that if they're taken there, then people will not talk to them anymore, or they'll probably won't be invited to the social gatherings or the family gatherings. Yes, that's one of the challenges is psychiatric, St. Giles Psychiatric Hospital, like it's just the same as when you have diabetes, you go to the CWM, have checkup. So when you have a mental illness and you see signs of a person having a mental illness, it's probably best to just take them to the St. Giles Hospital just for the doctors to assess them. It doesn't mean that they have to be admitted. Probably that'll be earlier when you would take them to the hospital rather than taking them to the priest for them to be prayed over, and then they will certainly enough go back to the doctors. Yeah, they'll be referred back to the doctors. And yes, for another thing, what we want survivors, we just wanted to be included. Like for you said, what support can you give towards survivors, people living with mental illness? We just need acceptance from the society. It doesn't mean that we living with mental illness, we have skills, we have qualifications. It's only when we have our downfall, probably we're acting weird, and as such, the opposite for what we used to be doing before. But yeah, that's what we just need, inclusion within the society and acceptance. Yeah.
On that note, we'll take another short break here on Speak Your Mind, and we'll be right back. We'll talk about the first signs of mental health illness. Welcome back to Gold FM Speak Your Mind, and we continue our discussion about the mental health issues in Fiji. And before the break, we talked about how our culture in Fiji does not really encourage a supportive and an enabling environment for those with mental health issues. And I'm with also some mental health survivor, Kelera Tabeta. And I'm going to ask you, Kelera, again, of your experience. Now, how did you feel when you first started realizing, or did you realize, or did you have to have someone tell you that you were succumbing to mental health illness?
Thank you, Pedeli. Actually, at that time, I didn't realize that I'm going through mental distress. At first, my experience was I wasn't sleepy, and I was just having severe headaches. And I was being negative. I was really negative. I was just accusing everyone. This person here is against me. That one here is against me. It was just negative. And then I remembered I was working in Nandi, and when I just came over for a weekend in Suva, I was in the bus. All I knew was I thought spies were after me. That was in my head. I thought spies were after me. I was delusional. And yes, I was totally the opposite. I was when people who know me, when they talk to me, I just say hi for no apparent reason. I swore back to them. And I was just walking up and down the road and just talking unnecessarily. And in the night, I was just dancing along the streets, which is weird. So yes, at that time, when I was told to be taken to St. Giles, I was just telling my dad, I'm not crazy, I'm not mad. Until the time he finally persuaded me, and then he took me over there to the to St. Giles. Yeah, that was one of the experience I had.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Kalera, because you are completely aware of also of what is happening around you, and some people wrongfully assume that mental health illness is the state of you tend to forget about everything else and you're not aware. Is that something similar that from your experience?
Well, with my sister's experience, one, I'm just going to backtrack a bit. My family's had experiences of violence already. So, and violence also can contribute to mental illness. So my sister already had her own experiences. And at that time, she had gone through some, another different type of experience. And then my grandmother passed away. So there was an accumulation of things.
Okay.
And she wasn't sleeping very well.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was going with her to different places, I knew she looked tired and wasn't sleeping. But I just thought, that's us. We don't sleep much. We're so excited. We've got lots of things to do. And we're hanging out with each other, listening to loud music and going places. But I didn't realize that she was actually getting sick. She was going through a bipolar mania. And she was very hyper, lots of energy. She didn't need the 6 or 8 hours of sleep. She could do lots of things and still not be tired. And so we just went to family functions. We went to my grandmother's funeral, and all those things just, triggered her, and it just made her even more unwell. She was taking on a lot of, there was a lot of stories of our families that were not very good, our family history, and all those things they were just accumulating until a point where one morning I was woken up and my aunt, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, said, "Hey, your sister is sick." Now she identified it, but I didn't identify it because it was bipolar, which I hadn't seen before. I've seen depression, and I've seen what schizophrenia is, or hearing voices, but I hadn't seen bipolar mania so much.
So bipolar,
it's a different, so it's just understanding different mental illnesses and their different signs. Huh?
So it's quite very complicated, especially for I mean the information that is also readily available, I guess for everyone really, is limited in terms of trying to identify also what these signs are. But it takes someone who has also been suffering a little bit from mental health. You mentioned your aunt who identified that for your sister first.
Yeah.
So it is important that we have our Psychiatric Survivors Association. Now, how much of support in terms of, and also collaborative effort with our medical Ministry of Health and also with the medical experts do you have?
At the moment, not really much. PSA is under the Fiji Disabled People's Federation. Yes, it's one of the affiliates from the Fiji Disabled People's Federation, and having a mental illness, we also have a disability. Yeah? So right now, we support from the donors overseas and from other mental health stakeholders like Fiji Alliance for Mental Health, where they conduct workshops and workshops about understanding our own illnesses. And for Ministry of Health, not really much support, yes, towards PSA. But for now, we have been supported right through from the Fiji Disabled People's Federation and the disability community and youth champs and Fiji Alliance for Mental Health. And plus, we have also some of our members at the CROP, which is in partnership with from Ministry of Health. Yeah.
And now, I'm sure with like a lot more concerted effort with these different agencies, that will really advance the work that you need to have established, yeah, in terms of understanding the illness and also with carers. Now, with youth champs, the youth champs for mental health, how much of work in terms of advocacy have you covered, and what else have you got to do?
When we first started Bethel in 2008, we formed youth champs because we found suicide is the leading cause of death among young people between the ages of 15 to 25. And now we're finding out that there's children under 15 who also commit suicide. And from that time, 2008, we were trying to link the mental illness and suicide. And now we have more information that depression is also strongly linked to suicide. And then we had to learn the other different mental illnesses. So over the years, we tried to use creative activities. So we've worked with Wish School. They were the Tandukani winners in 2008. They focused on suicide prevention theme. We worked with Lomeri Secondary School. They focused on stop stigma against mental illness in the 2010. And we worked with other communities. But we find we need to actually work collaboratively with other organizations and more consistently because we're based in Suva. We need to be able to do more other work in the Western and the Northern divisions.
I'm just going to hold you there, and we'll come back to the work that's being done by the Youth Champs for Mental Health and take another short break here on Speak Your Mind. Good afternoon and welcome back to Gold FM's Speak Your Mind, and we're tackling the issue of mental health in Fiji, and I'm joined by a representative from the Psychiatric Survivors Association and also by Rosie Catherine from Youth Champs for Mental Health. Now, before we head to the break, we were just talking a little bit about the work that Youth Champs for Mental Health are doing. Now, you said you mentioned you working with schools. Now, what about institutions like ecumenical organizations, the church? I've always mentioned that the church plays an important role. Ecumenical institutions in especially the Pacific, where we are that type of people, our traditions and our cultures, we associate. We have also in the church members of the community from all types of all different sectors, and it is always one of the most useful mechanisms to having and to do advocacy work. Has there been any step towards working with ecumenical institutions of the church?
We've very little.
Very little.
When we started, we did some work with the Wesley Budd Street Youth, the 2010 the Churchwood Methodist Rutuman Youth, and we're now invited also to other church youth groups. But as a whole, we haven't really worked with the church so much, you know. And this year, when we were planning the World Mental Health Day celebrations, that was something that we wanted to do a bit more as well. And through our Ministry of Youth networks, we've been invited to do a bit more sessions with the church. And we know it's really, really important to have that. But I know from St. Giles Hospital and possibly with the Psychiatric Survivors Association, they also get invitations from church or church youth groups, etc.
How much work in the community does the Psychiatric Survivors Association also do in terms of advocacy work?
Yes, not much, but last year we've been just doing outreach visitations towards the communities right through to the northern and the western and also in the interiors to just specifically the members, to our members, the survivors, and also the Turangani Koros, the church, the village elders. Yes, we do outreach for them, but for the church ones, not really. I think just one denomination, the Seventh Day in the Vatuanga area.
I just wanted to add also, we did just started to work with the Psi Faith, particularly the youth section of the Psi Faith, and we had a collaborative workshop in August. So that's our first step as well. It's also a bit of a challenge to reach out to the Indo-Fijian communities. And we know in terms of suicide that there's more Indo-Fijians who are affected by suicide, both completed and attempted.
Now, as much as we try not to classify it in terms of ethnicity, but it is a figure that we have to look at, and in terms of cultural aspects of the illness. Now, you say that Indo-Fijians also have a high incidence in terms of suicide attempts and also suicide. And what of mental illness? Now, how have you been able to do any work there, or at least try to approach that, working within the Fijian community and other communities?
It just, I guess, again, it requires, we need to be able to talk with other people, like the Muslim League, the Hindu leagues as well. When we started to work with the Sai Faith, we had asked them, how else, what else, could we do in the communities? And even at Hibiscus this year, we're at the Wellness Center, we had asked different people, what do you think? How do we reach out to communities? And they said, you actually have to come to our communities. If you invite us to a workshop, they may not come. So you actually need to go out into the communities and meet the leaders there. And it is always a challenge to be able to talk about it very openly. There's a lot of, there is a lot of stigma, but there's still not enough acceptance and or inclusion of people who have experiences of mental illness in the Indo-Fijian communities.
It is going to be an increased challenge if we continue in this path, yeah? So I guess programs having you on the show and having to talk about this and being able to talk about your experience, this is also a reason why it is important for us in the media industry to continue to bring your stories and continue to highlight these issues. How effective or how much of a planning approach in terms of working with the media do your organizations have? And what type of approach did you like to have a lot more of?
Well, we'd ideally like to have a bit more, education. So not just a one-off, talkback show like this, but like sessions on depression, identifying depression, on bipolar, identifying signs of bipolar, and talking about stress management over the radio, for longer periods of time, rather than, celebrating World Mental Health Day celebrations and just get in the media for that time, and then we've forgotten about mental health issues. But, mental health issues are also linked to NCDs as well.
That's right. Now, these linkages, there's a lot of, since you've managed, you've also mentioned violence. Now, it's another issue that we can talk about, from the effects of domestic violence, or violence against children. These are all contributing factors to mental health. With the experiences that you've had with your association of the Psychiatric Survivors Association, are you able to, is there a differentiate between illness, those who suffer different types of illnesses because of how they came into, how they were affected?
No, at Psychiatric Survivors, there's no differentiation of the illness that's been diagnosed. We're just all one. When we have a meeting, it's up to the person whether he or she wants to say
share their stories.
Yeah, share the stories. Yeah, but there's no differentiation of this one has got this and that one is.
Well, in terms of how they've come to this state, do they share? Do you have a record of how much of an effect like these elements have, like violence and or the history of mental illness in the family? Is there a record of this so that we have as a sort of a scope of what we have in Fiji?
Not well in mental health services, not quite. But I know with the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, they have a research that they launched earlier this year about violence against women. And if you look through the research, which is quite thorough, you can tell that, and we also know for the fact that mental health, people who have experiences of mental illness may not always access mental health services. And if we have over 60% of women who have experienced violence in Fiji, we really have a lot of undetected mental illness in our communities. And we've got, children who have experienced sexual abuse, children of families who have experiences of physical violence and all other types of violence. So we still have, as mental health, we don't have all that data with us. And that's something that we'd like to do a bit more over the next year or so, to be able to collect that type of information.
Well, after this explanation, I'm just finding like this is a grave situation that we are in as a country. You'd think that with all the time with technology and information being available, we still have deterrence to the work in advocating mental health illness. On that note, we'll take another short break here on Speak Your Mind. Welcome back to our last segment here on Speak Your Mind on Gold FM. And, well, we're talking about mental health, in Fiji. And just in our discussion so far, we've, quite determined from my, friend here from Youth Champs for Mental Health, Rosie Catherine, and also Kelera Taveta from the Psychiatric Survivors Association. In our last segment, we've come to the gist that here in Fiji, we are the hindrance to it, moving information about mental health issues. We still are not comfortable. From your experience, I'm sure, Kelera, with your family and friends, how are the other survivors in the Psychiatric Survivors Association? Do they mention a lot more? I mean, do families still have the same understanding or empathy that you search for?
For example, there was a friend of mine. She's also a survivor. We were going to one visitation last year, and the husband didn't want her to tell the other family members visiting that she's involved with psychiatric survivors. She's a member and advocating and doing awareness. That was part of the family members not comfortable of their family members coming out saying that they have a mental illness. But I'm thankful that my family they're supportive. They don't care if I'm in public now. I tell everyone that I'm a person living with a mental illness. But there are some of my few of my friends, their families or even their friends, or probably just the mention of them going to St. Giles, people just don't want to talk to them anymore. Yes, they just don't want to come out with it. That's why that must be the reason they're not comfortable saying that they are living with a mental illness. Yeah.
You know, at times there are claims by, certain faith-based institutions, organizations that may say that they've prayed over someone and they've been cured of their mental health illness. Now, can this be so from your experience?
From my experience, I remembered I've changed all. I went to all denominations. I went to Seventh Day, and I've been prayed over, and I was told I was going to be cured. I've gone off medications, but I still have my relapses. That's why I'm on medications now, and I'm complying to my medications. I've been told that I've been cured, but I still have my relapses, meaning I get readmitted to the psychiatric hospital.
So it's important that you keep your medication.
For some of the survivors, yes.
I think, because personally, I think that spiritual aspects can be useful sometimes, both for recovery, but also in certain experiences of mental illness. But I think we also have to be quite careful, because not everyone is as maybe as qualified or has more knowledge of mental health issues. So recently at a mental health conference that was held at the Fiji School of Medicine, for example, we had talked about that sometimes people take them to the priests or the rich doctors,
Sure.
and then these people use them more. They ask them for money, they ask them for other things, but really they're not qualified to identify mental illness. So there needs to be a bit of a balance, and then even maybe educating people a bit more, whether they're priests or they're community leaders or spiritual leaders, to be able to identify mental illness and how to best support a person if they're going to church or if they're very sick, how to be able to refer to a mental health service. Because we also have the stress management wards at the different hospitals, at Lambasa, Suva, as well as in Lautoka, and just how to support people better, but not take advantage of them when they're in those experiences.
Can I just ask a little bit more about these stress management wards? These are available at hospitals in Lambasa, also in Suva.
Yeah.
Now, is that available to anyone? Or how does it come about? This is with the Ministry of Health Hospitals, of course, and it's manned by the Ministry of Health officials. How does one have access to this? Or you just turn up at the hospital?
Well, some people go to the St. Giles Hospital, either in Suva and in Latok and Lambasa. When they go, when they go see the doctor, then they're referred to the stress management ward after that.
Okay. Now, with the Psychiatric Survivors Association, what now? What have you got ahead of you with work that you still have to do?
We still need a lot of work to do. First of all, some of the survivors, we need more workshops and rehabilitation, halfway homes for them to be able to cope with their everyday living, because some of them, once they've come out of the psychiatric hospital, it's very hard for them to
get back
into the track. Yeah, and what we've been doing is just organizing members' activities just to improve their lives of the psychiatric survivors, and refer them to, if they need counseling, if they need more counseling, or they go to CROP. Well, some of them do go to CROP. And also we have a program which is called IDEA program. We're trying to get back them to work. For psychiatric survivors to be able to, for them to go back to work, because, for example, most of them, due to their illness, they've been laid off work due to their illness, and that's one of the main PSAs trying to get them back onto employment.
Obviously, the stigma and the discrimination that comes with it is a major hindrance too.
Major hindrance to it.
Rosie?
Yeah, we still have a lot more work to do, but we also, like we said earlier, our culture, we're supposed to be a friendly type of people and smiling, and a lot of bula smiles and friendly faces, but we don't encourage people to be able to express themselves. As young people, whether in the Itauke or Rutuman or Fijian Indian, you don't have a voice. So if you're a young person with a disability or disability associated with a mental illness, you really don't have a voice. And if you're a woman, your voice is just not heard at all. And so, and even when you were growing up, if you're a young boy or a young man, you're told not to cry, not to be emotional, to be strong, to be a man, to be masculine. And so we were brought up in that type of environment over and over again. There's so much expectations of us to have A+, to be an accountant, to be a lawyer. But there's no, no one asks us, what do we want to do? What are our talents? What are our strengths? What are our hopes? And, and just to be able to understand us and to believe and to have hope, that's still a bit of a challenge growing up in our environment here. And I'm sure it's every, other countries also have those types of experience. And then when you have a disability associated with mental illness, the stigma and everything else becomes even a more challenge than that. And, whether you want to get an employment, whether you want to be able to go to school, have a home. Some people don't have homes, so you see some on the streets. Some are staying with other relatives. Some are still at the St. Giles Hospital there because their families have left them there. So as organizations, but as a nation, we really need to prioritize mental health. Mental health, like I mentioned earlier, mental health issues is also linked to NCDs. So you can't do NCDs without mental health. And that's what was emphasized in this week's, the weekend's mental health conference, was that mental health is important in primary health care, and we need to be able to put in the money, the resources, the finances, and make it a priority.
On that note, thank you very much, ladies, for coming and joining us this afternoon. And I can promise you here that we will continue to highlight and also invite you back on the show as long as you're still available to come. Yeah. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Speak Your Mind. Tune in again next week right here on Gold FM.